Testing the mic. And now it's on. Are you moving all the mics across from one to another when they speak? Okay.
Testing.
Testing. Did that work?
No.
Do I need to switch it on or something? No.
You have to put it close to your mouth. Automatically switches on by voice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
wait a little bit.
Is our Zoom participant available? Charles, how very nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Checking the sound. I'm not sure if Charles can hear me. Okay, you can hear, we're not hearing you. Can you organize the sound for Charles? Can you hear? You can hear me, but we can't hear you. They're working up there at the moment, I think. You're presiding the room, Charles, in a very distinguished fashion.
No, and actually, when I called, I was under the impression that he was literally outside. So Sydney's on the case, okay.
She's on the case.
Because Beau Rivage is not that far, is it?
Yes.
My number and email on it. It makes a very convenient business card.
Yeah.
Sure, but she's been. Well,
Is he on back? Is he on back now?
he's actually number one.
All right.
I mean, I can start, but I
Oh, there he is.
Ah.
There he is.
Super, delighted to see you here. Yofi, can I just check, do we have our Zoom, is our Zoom correspondent online? Could you please try and connect him as quickly as possible? We'll start, but then if you can bring him on as soon as possible, because he is in the first part of the session. So thank you. Thanks very much. Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience as we deal with our technical challenges. Delighted that you're all here with us today. To open the session, I'm going to invite Nadia Eiler, who is the director of the SDG lab here in Geneva, to say a few words. Nadia, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Piers, and I hope it's okay I take off my mask just for my very brief introductory remarks. It's wonderful to see you all today. I wish we could actually see each other's faces, but those days will hopefully come back sooner than later. I know also of a lot of colleagues who would have wanted to be in the room today, but that felt it was more appropriate to actually follow online for the reasons related to the pandemic. So I'd like to say, first of all, also a very warm welcome to all colleagues following us online, and a warm welcome, obviously, to all of you here in the room. A warm welcome also to our panelists, whom Piers will be introducing afterwards personally. In particular, I'd like to welcome our colleagues who've come all the way from Ghana. Welcome to cold Geneva. The weather's cold, but our hearts are warm in welcoming you here. This is really the spirit of building bridges. It's building bridges among the community existing in Geneva, but above all, it's also building bridges with countries. As you all know, building bridges is not just an event, not just a summit, not just a week. It's really a movement that's starting to develop in this city, in Switzerland, again with an aim of making this unique ecosystem work for countries and work for the SDGs. And so this session, Pipeline Building, Linking Investors and National SDG Themes, is really about that. It's about how can we build bridges between different communities, between the investor community, between government representatives, UN representatives, academia, to really make sure that we connect the dots, not only because it's the thing to do nowadays to collaborate and to partner, but we partner and collaborate because it makes so much sense, because none of us have all the answers, and each and one of us have got a sector of expertise which complements the expertise of others. And so this is the reason why at the SDG Lab, we joined forces with Ground Up, with Piers and Brenduza Burrows, who unfortunately is sick today and would have really wanted to be here in the room. We joined forces in saying, how can we contribute together to connecting all those dots, to be able to co-create a pipeline of opportunities that make investment sense, and above all, that make SDG sense. And when we say make SDG sense, that they make sense for the priorities of a given country. I think we've heard over and over again this week in the opening summit and throughout the different panels, we've talked about sustainable finance, we talked about the SDGs, we talked a lot about how we can align investments for climate action, but there's been actually quite little around how can we align and connect dots to make sure that capital actually flows to country priorities, SDG priorities. And this is why we're also so happy to have today representatives from countries, from governments, from the investor community at country level, but also our UN colleagues who know so well the context at country level. I'm happy also that our colleagues from UNDP have been able to join us today, who are doing excellent work together with governments, and in this case with the government of Ghana, to really spell out the opportunities at country level that make sense for investment and make sense for the SDGs. So welcome again. I won't go any more in depth because I think our panelists today are the ones who know much better about this subject than me. But I'd like to thank again Piers and Brenduza for their leadership on organizing this panel, and I'd like to thank in particular my colleague Sydney Alfonso, who's been instrumental in making this happen. Thank you very much, Sydney, for having built those bridges with country. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to do it. Thank you very much. Piers, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nadia. I'm also going to take the liberty of removing my mask. And as we're going to be running this very much more as a conversation rather than as a series of presentations, I'm going to invite my fellow panelists, if they feel comfortable, just to take off your masks, because otherwise taking it off while you speak, putting it back on is going to be a little bit more challenging. So that's up to you, but if you would like to, then please feel free to do so. We're, I hope, sufficiently distanced not to cause any risks to the audience. Nadia talked about countries, and one of the important things in the building bridges, or one of the important things in looking at things through looking at an SDG investment lens, is to go away sometimes from that very macro overview and to be able to focus on very specific opportunities. Many of you will have heard yesterday the President of Ghana's very encouraging and rousing comments, where he essentially is saying that Ghana is not only open for business, but Ghana is open for business in a very structured, very thoughtful way, looking to encourage international investors to come to the country and to put their investments in the context of the SDG National Plan, which is linked to the Ghana national budget. And it's because of that focus on this, that we have had the great pleasure of working ourselves with Ghana and focusing on Ghana alongside our colleagues from UNDP in order to really make a pilot that we hope will work very well. Let me just quickly, before we start, introduce my very distinguished panel. Yofi Grant, the CEO of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, a starred investor in his own right, who has come here from Ghana to be with us. Xavier Pierluca, who is the managing partner, founder of Enabling Capital. Agi Verez, the director of UNDP here in Geneva. Jerry Parks, the managing director of Injaro, a leading investor in Ghana. And I'm delighted that Charles Abani, who is the UN resident coordinator in Ghana, has been able to join us and is sitting on a Zoom throne above the auditorium. Nice to see you, Charles. Delighted you've made it.
Morning.
And we can hear you this time. Good. What I'd like to do, I said I'd like to run this as a conversation. The way I think of these panels is really a conversation on some interesting, important subjects between some very intelligent people. And I would like you in the audience to feel that you're very much part of that. So please do feel. Towards the end, I will give some time explicitly for questions. But frankly, if during the debate and discussion, one of you wants to pop a hand up with a point, please do feel free to do so. Be delighted to have you and include you in the conversation. I normally say it's a dinner party conversation. This is a breakfast one with coffee rather than champagne in the evening, so you need to keep well awake. Let me start first by turning to Yofi and asking if you can just put, from your perspective, the investment environment in Ghana in context, and particularly with a focus on the challenges faced by the MSME sector, which is a sector that we are putting a lot of emphasis on. Yofi, over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So first, let's put Ghana into context. Middle of the world country. Ghana is the only country that is on latitude 0 and longitude 0. So we are technically in the middle of the world. 365 days of sunshine, very warm environment, very friendly people, known to be politically very stable, known for its love for the rule of law. And in Ghana, we just love going to the courts on the smallest pretext. So in that context, here is a country that, let's say historically, has sort of led the African political emancipation, the first sub-Saharan country to get independence. And therefore, we've gone through our own ideological experimentation over the last 60 years to arrive at what we believe is constitutional governance with let's say, with a bit of a far-right slant. And therefore, the private sector is very key to development. So government on its own actually came up with a program called the Coordinated Program for Economic, Social Development Policies Plan from 2017 to 2024, which really captures, should I say, the overall picture of how to integrate plans and programs to achieve the SDGs. And Ghana was probably the first country to integrate the SDGs into its budgetary process, such that you could align government development with the SDGs. But let's take a step back, because if you come to the African context, I have always posited that our development agenda has always been aligned to the SDGs, even when we didn't know there were SDGs. So, of course, like SDG 1, which is poverty alleviation, it's very clear that this is a continent that, despite its mineral wealth and potential wealth, it's probably lagging behind in development. And so SDG 1 of poverty alleviation was very important. But then we also recognize, because of the lack of capital on the continent, SDG 17 was critical. That's partnerships and linkages. Now, when you take those two and you look at the real universe between that, then that represents our real focus on development. So we need to improve access to education, to health, better housing, drinking water. All these are real in our budgetary processes. And that is what our governments have sought to do. So in Ghana, we've just found a way to make sure that there is real alignment. In fact, we actually went through a volunteer nation analysis to be sure that we were aligned and really on track to achieve the SDGs. And we are somewhat there, but of course, because the economy is largely dominated by MSMEs, and I would like to put this in context, because the concept of an SME in the international sense is not the same as we have it over there. In Ghana, a company that has, let's use the IFC definition, total assets of $15 million, employs not less than 200 people. In Ghana, that's a very large company. But in the international context, that's an SME. So we are more between the micro and the small, where you have companies that are maybe up to $250,000, but returning internal rates of return of 50% and above. Now, they are saddled with the usual problems of small informal companies: lack of governance, inability to raise capital because they don't have the structures that can be well evaluated and assessed by the funding agencies. They are informal. They lack access to markets because they don't have the corporate structure to enable them to do that. They can't hire marketing people. They find it difficult to hire accountants. So in that whole framework, then we need to probably enable them, but also to transition them to formalize, to understand that their work, their goods and services will enable us achieve the SDGs. And sometimes it's a bit of a challenge, only because for a lot of people, when they hear SDGs, they just think, okay, that's another set of rules and regulations brought from above, and they don't see it in the practical sense. And the issue, the challenge is actually moving them to see it practically. And in Ghana today, I dare say that for the average private sector person, he doesn't directly think of SDGs. He thinks of his business and how do I grow my business, how do I make profits. But government's job has been to realign them such that even what government supports and incentivizes enables us to achieve the SDGs. And for us at the GIPC, whose remit is to solicit, facilitate, and attract investments, one of the key developments we've had in recent times, and is going to be passed into law, is to develop what we call the responsible, sustainable investor. And we are saying that at that level, at the higher level, for an investor to qualify for the incentives, pretty lucrative incentives, you must be aligned on two fronts. One being that your project must enable us accelerate achievement of an SDG. And then secondly, you must engage the local economy such that you are working to develop together. So that's where the partnerships and linkages come in. And it's been very good for us, been critical for us, because a lot of developing countries feel that they are denied revenue capital because they have to give all these big incentives to investors. And so to ensure that both parties are aligned, both the indigenous economy, the local economy, and the foreign direct investor, you try to partner them to make sure they achieve that. So for me, my rap sheet, or what I call my rap sheet, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, means that I have to tick boxes that are geared towards achieving the SDGs. And that is how we've aligned with government in our strategy as well. But at the government level, the policies that government have put in are there clearly to directly address issues under the 17 SDGs. So I'll give you three of the most important ones. The one policy which was very fundamental to our being able to transform our economy from one predicated on the export of raw materials and resources, which really doesn't enable you to create as much wealth as you want, to one of value addition and productivity, is the free senior high school education, to ensure that in the medium term, the minimum education of the average Ghanaian will be high school education. That in itself is a major enabler of people getting to an industrialized economy. The second one is the one district, one factory policy, which says that out of the 260 districts in Ghana, each district must at least have a value addition and transformative, economy to use the raw materials of that jurisdiction, of that area, that district. Now, can you imagine what that would do? Because it means that in every corner of the country, you are attempting to industrialize. It will create jobs for people, it will create new economies in haulage, transportation, marketing, and it will also stop the rural to urban flow that we see every year. And then the last one, which I would like to go on, is planting for food and jobs, because agriculture is fundamental to us. So government's initiative was to improve extension, improve fertilizer use, and improve access to land, and generally upskill in agriculture, because most of it has been agrarian in Ghana now. So there is a clear direction of matching large-scale industrialized agriculture with the small shareholder farms to make sure there's mutual benefits from both, but also enable wealth creation from the smallholder farmers. I think I'll stop here and then we can talk about the others.
Thank you very much indeed. And I just love those last three, which are really, they're enablers. It's not so much the goal at the end, so much as the enabler that really allows these things to happen. It's superb. Thank you very much, Yofi. You were talking also with a great deal of granularity there about how you approach the investor perspective. You referred also to the government's linkage between the SDGs and the national budget. Charles, may I turn to you, sitting in Ghana as the resident coordinator for the UN. You are in the lucky position of being a resident coordinator who has a government that has fully adopted the SDGs, built them in with a national plan into their budget. Perhaps you could just comment for a few minutes about how that connection works and the degree to which that connection gives clarity about investment opportunities, the ways in which people can be looking at investments, because they know there is a government support for specific SDGs.
Thank you, Piers. Can you hear me?
Very well. Yes, thank you very well.
Yes, okay, great. So thank you, and let me build on Yofi's initial comments. The SDGs have been integrated into the sort of national planning framework here. Ghana has the National Development Planning Commission, which is charged with trying to connect the government's development plans very clearly with the SDGs. And currently are just concluding what's called the National Medium-Term Development Policy Framework, which seeks to align around some key areas, the aspirations of Ghana as articulated through the budget and through various policy statements. There is a high-level ministerial committee on the SDGs, which brings people together, as well as a technical unit, again, operating out of the National Development Planning Commission. There is an SDG advisory unit to the presidency, headed by none other than Dr. Eugene Owusu. There are various levels of implementation going on, and Ghana has taken this very seriously. That just in 2020, there was a budget review of the SDGs and the road to 2030, which I think also in collaboration with the World Economic Forum has identified accurately a gap in terms of achieving the SDGs, significant gap, 520 odd billion between now and 2030 USD. And the task is actually to begin to look at and prioritize those interventions that will be transformative and catalytic as Ghana begins to try and build the resources required. Clearly, this requires a much more private sector focused approach, moving away from a funding model more to a financing model. And I think the government has also articulated this in one of the kind of flagship documents that I guess signposts the recovery from COVID itself, called Ghana Cares, or Batampa, which really seeks to leverage global financing and investors, but does so in the context of providing a base of support from the Ghana government itself. And I think that some very clear areas in which Ghana has investment opportunities and is looking to create a number of enabling policy environments and policy actions. Yofi's just referred to 3 of these that provide a basis and a set of opportunities to engage in. The government is also commencing, again with UN support, the voluntary national review, which is looking at a number of key areas. And one of them for Ghana is, of course, around youth, young people, and engaging them. So connecting that to the free SHS program and looking at where are the opportunities for young people, which very much connects to the MSME marketplace as well. I think within that financing landscape, there's a lot of work done around the PPP policy and also looking at ways in which Ghana can do other enabling environment policies, for instance, access to information, which enable and give confidence to investors as well. Ghana has been a routine participant in the annual SDG investment fairs in country, but also at the global level as well. And I think the work done by the president to launch the country financing roadmap for the SDGs shows a strong linkage between development aspirations and these global 17 goals that Ghana is seeking to also work closely on. As we also know, the president himself is an advocate for the SDGs, and in collaboration with the co-chair in Norway has worked extensively on these big issues. I think suffice it to say that the framework is here for engagement and a clear sort of sense around that. And although the 2022 budget is still in the parliament being debated now, there are clear priority areas segmented according to environment, social, and governance framework. And Ghana is also quite vastly advancing on its own digital vision. And we all know that in these post-COVID times, a clear digital vision that is seeking to connect and create the information loops, the data access that is necessary is key. And I guess the last point I would mention, the recent successful completion of the Ghana census process, which provides significant additional data, which is now coming out in very detailed documents that gives also insights into investment opportunities. The UN is also supporting this, but I guess let me stop here now. Glad to discuss further where some of these opportunities are and the ways in which we are collaborating with Yofi's outfit and also with the SDG investment, the SDG advisory to the president.
Thank you very much indeed, Charles. That was super to hear this, this linkage. And again, just as Yofi gave us a number of very strong programs and enablers, Charles talking about also the very strong desire and linkage there, which goes back to my comment at the beginning. Why choose Ghana? Well, you choose Ghana because you choose a country that is absolutely committed to making an environment, creating an environment that enables investment. Let me turn, though, now to Jerry, because we've been relatively macro so far. And Jerry Parks has been investing on the ground, running funds under the management of Injaro for the last 12 years. You've got a number of different funds and a lot of assets under management, and you are working in that MSME space very firmly. So, Jerry, give us a little bit of your experience. Sleeves rolled up, dirty fingernails, investing on the ground. How's it worked? And where do you see where do you begin to see, if you do, an alignment between the SDGs and your investments? And do the SDGs help? We'll come on to that more later in the panel as well, but are they a reference point which is worth looking at? Jerry, over to you.
Thank you very much, Piers. So in all these discussions about SDGs and investment in SDGs, it's always important to remember that there's a need for financial intermediaries, people who will actually manage the aggregated capital and ensure that it goes into real businesses that are on a daily basis working towards achieving the SDGs. Like Piers said, we have been in the space for about 12 years. We've invested in about 12 companies across 5 countries, but being based in Ghana, Ghana has had quite a fair share of that capital. We're happy to say that we have around 3 million people who've benefited from the investments that we've made. These people are mainly smallholder farmers and their families. Now, this sounds like quite, well, it might sound like quite an impressive story, but I think it's very important to think about how Anijaro comes to being. And it didn't happen accidentally. And it happened through the collaboration of several different parties, you know, public sector, private sector, philanthropic organizations, and a certain level of support, investment, subsidy, grants, and I'll go into a bit of that. But I think before I go into the detail, I just want to sort of highlight 3 or 4 ideas that I think should underlie how we think about implementing SDGs in our country. So the first one is the power of the holders of capital, or at least this is how I like to refer to them. This is the public sector, the philanthropic organizations, and the private investors to actually drive real change on the ground. We have only been able to achieve what we've achieved through the help of these people. The second thing is the importance of experimentation or innovation, which can be produced when these 3 entities work together. The third piece is the importance of getting feedback from the front line, from people like ourselves, from the businesses that we invest in, and using that feedback to sort of modify the way we approach the SDGs. So with that in mind, I'll go back into the history of how Injara started a little bit. It's been an interesting ride. There were two of us, 2 Africans, who decided that we wanted to dedicate part of our lives to investing capital in Africa to help develop our continent. We felt that we had to be part of the development story, and we couldn't leave it all to international or foreign organizations to do the work for us. But we had no capital. And we were fortunate to come across a Canadian foundation that was willing to invest in us, grant capital, interest-free loan, technical assistance in the form of experienced advisors from the West, including peers, as luck would have it. And they backed us to actually start raising capital from other investors, these other capital providers, and were very gracious in introducing us to their contacts, accompanying us to visit DFIs, government investors, private sector investors. It wasn't easy, but at least it got us started. And our fund was very focused on agriculture and agricultural investment. So by targeting smallholder farmers, we were able to focus a message which eventually got us investors like CDC, FMO, Proparco, the Soros Economic Development Fund, AGRA, and got us started investing in agricultural businesses in West Africa. Now, when the fund was created, and I'm truncating this story a little bit, there was a technical assistance facility included in that enabled us to assist underlying companies who may not have the capacity, and I think Yofi referred to this, that may not have the capacity to actually deliver from a commercial perspective. But this was a facility that was added to our vehicle, and into which some investors contributed separately, grant capital that we used to procure consultant services, human capacity for the underlying companies to help them access our investments. Actually, in one case, we had a company that did not have any accounts. They had slips of paper, records of transactions, and I remember us flying into Mali, picking up a box of papers, getting it back to Abidjan, and getting an accountant to create the accounts from scratch so we could analyze the accounts and make the investment, right? This was made possible by technical assistance facilities that people are willing to invest, capital that people are willing to put to work without expecting an immediate return. So, I mean, the companies that we invested in, we've been able to exit a couple of them, some of them with relatively good returns. Some of them have obviously failed as well. But in that process, we've learned a lot. And to speak to the point about taking feedback from the front line and applying it, I remember one of the things that our early investors insisted on was that we be a minority investor in the companies that we provided capital to, because this was pretty much the norm in the West and in the global North. But we found as we were making the investments that in some cases it probably made sense to actually take a majority stake in the businesses. Thankfully, in our first fund, our investors were open to this. when we explained it, they agreed for us to convert some of the debt instruments into equity instruments and therefore have a greater impact on the underlying companies in which we were investing. And this really helped. In some cases, we really saw a significant improvement in performance, the financial performance of the businesses, as well as the impact that those businesses were able to create. Now, in terms of another example when it comes to learning, and I think this now moves me to one of the newer funds that we're managing, which is called the ABC Fund. We saw right from the inception at the design phase an inclusion of the idea of blended capital. So including some investors at the fund level who are willing to sort of be junior in the capital structure, who are willing to accept some financial loss in order to crowd in more of the private sector capital that sort of insisted on achieving its financial return. There was also an element in this new fund of rewarding fund managers for actually achieving certain SDGs. So SDG targets were actually set in terms of investment in food crops, investment in female-run businesses, etc. And the fund manager actually gets compensated on achieving some of these goals. So hopefully by going around in this sort of long-winded description, I've been able to explain a bit some of the key themes that are very important when it comes to ensuring that there are enough financial intermediaries that can effectively deploy capital in achievement of the SDG goals. So I think I'll pause for now so that we can continue. Thank you.
Jerry, thanks so much, and it's just lovely to hear the examples. I mean, you gave us your three things: the powers of the holders of capital, and the shoe leather that you wore out getting those holders of capital, the DFIs, to actually open their checkbooks, and I know it was a long process. The experimentation and innovation, and essentially that experimentation and innovation is going and picking up that box of accounts and being prepared to do that. That's super to hear. And then that feedback about how you have to change your investment structures. Really very interesting to get that level of granularity. Thank you so much. So we've had a focus now as an introduction to Ghana. And Ghana as our pilot country from the point of view of the pipeline builder, Ghana as a country which also has benefited from a lot of work by our colleagues in the UNDP, particularly as they have worked on the impact opportunity mapping. And I'd like to turn now to Agi Veres. Agi, would you perhaps like to share with us, and we move into this broader aspect, how does the UNDP impact opportunity mapping part work, and how do you see that with respect to Ghana and possibly further afield as well?
Thank you very much, Piers, and it was really great to hear these stories because, I mean, it's one story that has many elements to it because it resonates very well. I have seen it in many developing countries, similarly to what you were saying, creating the accounts and having bank accounts, for example, and things like that. And I will connect what I wanted to say about the SDG investor platform and map that we have globally, how this fits into this picture and why it's important to, have all of these elements in place. I mean, Yofi and Charles, you were talking about kind of the enabling environment and what we can all do to strengthen that environment, which essentially creates, kind of an attractive investor landscape, having some policy incentives in place. And Jerry, you talked about how to build the investable possibilities for the investors. And how I want to connect this is that these are all kind of parts of the puzzle. But what is the big picture? I mean, the big picture is that this is great to have this kind of aggregation and have started with grants and some small capital on the ground. But how are we going to connect it to the large financial flows that are available globally? And I think, this is the nut we're trying to crack here at this conference, and we had many discussions about the barriers for investments globally. And we have heard the numbers of 20% of globally, only 20% of the global capital sits in developing countries, although we have 84% of the population and the economies in developing countries. So this is by way of introduction of what we are trying to do. And of course, we work on the ground as well. As UNDP with the governments, with the investors, under the coordination of Charles, for example, in Ghana. But what we are also trying to do globally is trying to break these barriers and trying to be a conduit of how we are connecting investors to investment opportunities. So the investor maps that we have now in 16, 17 countries, it's essentially trying to address one of the main barriers, together with touching up on the other ones, which is about market intelligence. I mean, I've been listening very carefully in this conference, and Jerry was on one of the panels where we were discussing the barriers between supply and demand, how we can find the investors that want to invest. And there are, three main, to simplify it, three main elements to it. It's when we talk about especially investments that are taking the SDGs forwards. It's the impact, it's the return on investment, and it's the risk. And they're all interlinked. Now, when we talk about the impact, I mean, Charles and Yofi, you talked very much about it. We need to have that impact in a prioritized way. So wherever we're trying to get the investors, it has to fit the local context of the country. It shouldn't be just kind of, an average across 17 SDGs. It has to be with intent, and it has to really incentivize the investments towards the right development problems. So that's one element of our SDG investor map. We're really looking at being on the ground in 170 countries. We have the local knowledge. We understand what the country's development challenges are. We work with the governments to identify those priorities. So we have that element. The second is really looking at the risk and how to reduce that. And you address some of it. I mean, some of it is about the perceived risk, some is real risk, and it goes back a lot to due diligence, to the lack of information, not just about the market, but it's about the conditions. How would investors globally know what kind of great incentives Ghana put in place? There are several ways, but still the lack of information is a barrier. And then we talk about return on investment. When people hear impact investment, their first reaction is the return will be lower. Now, in developing countries, it's not necessarily true. The risk might be higher, but actually the impact also the return also might be higher. So essentially what we're trying to do with these investors' maps is take this landscape, take the prioritization of the demand and the development issues, put that in the context of what is the investor appetite in terms of the risk and the return on investment, and provide this analysis for investors, identifying specific investment opportunity areas in these countries, that go to, for example, telemedicine or whatever it may be. So it's sectoral, but it's much more granular than just an overall sector. So identifying, in this example, I'm just using it not necessarily for Ghana, is the sector of telemedicine has XYZ opportunities in a certain country, where we identify the risk factor, the impact, the return on investment, and also the kind of 20 data points with a clear analysis. And this is on an SDG investment platform where anybody can go. It's an open global public good where people can search, investors can search by country, by area, etc. Now, and I will finish here, Piers, because I think this is a good segue for you to see how this links to the pipeline builder and how this translates into investments in the ground. What we're all struggling with is, let's say we have identified these investments areas, and now we have, I think, about 300 investments areas globally in these 17 countries where we have done this analysis. But how does that translate into pipeline? How does that translate into deals? So where should investors exactly go? And that's where, what you talked about, Jerry, is important to have at the national level, the asset managers, the aggregation that's there. But that's also not enough. How do we connect then with the investors globally? And this is why I think when you're talking about the pipeline builder, you take it to the next level of creating that interface. And this is where we also stay engaged, because then we can act as a conduit to the investment community and the financial community globally to basically have this information and have the networks, the connections, the convening and so forth to basically create this platform between supply and demand.
Agi, thank you very much indeed. And I can assure you, Agi and I have not pre-planned this, but she talked about the telemedicine, which is a sector that is identified If you look at the flyers that you were given when you were here, when you came in, there is a very specific investment opportunity in telemedicine shown in that flyer for $2 million. So, and that is an example of, indeed, the pipeline builder coming forward under the umbrella of that very broad investment map and the sectorial identification to actually raise up very specific investment opportunities which are matching those sectorial sectors. So, Agi, super, thank you. Let me turn, though, because one of the challenges here is very much this intermediation. It's the aggregation and then the intermediation. And it's that intermediation with the capital providers. I hope some of you are in the room sitting here waiting to get your checkbooks out. And Xavier Pierluca at Enabling Capital has been doing that intermediation for a long time. Xavier, where do you see the particular challenges that lie in that? Agi's talked about important aspects such as risk, which clearly risk and perceived risk, and a lot of us are having to try and find a way to bring people inside the Africa envelope, inside the risk envelope, to get rid of that distance risk premium. Xavier, tell us a bit about what you're doing to broker that.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks, Piers. Thanks, Agi. Yeah, I think many of the items I'm going to say now, I mean, you touched on it already, Agi, actually, now when it comes to the requirements and the constraints that we face when we engage with private investors or institutional investors, generally speaking. First of all, on my end, I don't come from a country-specific focus, no, when it comes to investing in impact or investing with impact or sustainable finance. I come from 20 years of experience in the field of impact investing, or what is now impact investing, which started on microfinance, but more, you know, with a sectorial focused and sector focused funds, right? So it's not country specific. And I wish 20 years ago when, you know, we started working in the field of microfinance, or when we started working in the field of impact investing, countries like Ghana would have developed programs involving or embedding in their budget the SDGs, as you mentioned, Yofi, before. I think it's actually extremely valuable and seems to be a great way to achieve economic development. Specifically, when we recognized after the success of microfinance 20 years ago that bottom-up approaches were actually very successful, and as a result, we followed in the footsteps of microfinance with the structuring of many other impact investment funds, focusing on access to energy, access to education, access to healthcare. So on my end, these are some of the topics that I have been focusing on, mainly access to microfinance, access to finance, access to healthcare, education, and energy more recently in the last 6 years. Taking the example of microfinance, right, it didn't start with private capital and institutional investors. I mean, we really started with public finance. We started in the industry with money coming from development agencies, not-for-profit organizations, foundations, and over time, as we progressed and the sector progressed, shown that it was sustainable potentially and then became profitable, we moved to, at the time it was not called blended finance, but securitization vehicle, right? It's a bad word today, of course. You all remember the 2008 crisis and the several movies that followed. Following that crisis with the margin call and many other great movies. But these CDOs and CLOs were actually very effective, and they were the start of blended finance or blended capital. We started attracting private money in the 2004 years, 2004, 2005, thanks to money coming from the CDC, money coming from IFC, money coming from the AFD in France as well, and leveraging this capital by investing insurance companies and pension funds into microfinance. At the time, there was no SDGs as well. It didn't exist, unfortunately, right? So we were targeting a specific sector, in that case, microfinance, and then over time we moved to others, but without a common language, which was missing. And it was even more difficult. Every time we had to go to raise a fund, we had to start from scratch. Basically, what is your theory of change? Why are you engaged with financial services or with access, to healthcare? What do you think you're going to bring to one country or to a population or to a community, etc.? Some of the constraints now that we faced in microfinance, right, with investors, have been what you mentioned, Aggie. I mean, one key constraint is liquidity and the need of investors for liquidity. Unfortunately, you were speaking, Yofi, about MSMEs, right, in Ghana. We are dealing mainly with highly illiquid investments, generally speaking, right? I think we have to agree to that. It's impossible to think you're going to be able to invest in a company or in a sector in emerging economies and recoup your capital after 3 or 6 months. No, that's not realistic. Fortunately, of course, there are mechanisms to generate that liquidity, and we can discuss that later on. But the second aspect is the risk return, of course, concept. No, and generally speaking, there's a perception of risk that is much higher than the risk itself, and we have to deal with that on an ongoing basis, right? It is actually, in many cases, less risky to invest in an SME in Ghana with a local shareholder, and I'm speaking about Ghana, but I know very little about actually. So it's for you guys. But it's less risky, than investing in a bond or in a listed equity stock on your stock market here, right? That is fueled by basically this liquidity facility and quantitative easing plans, that we've seen over the last few years. This is just a casino, right? So we need to explain that to investors. So we need to educate them about the perception of risk and design the right mechanism with blended finance. The third aspect is, of course, the lack of information, right? I mean, about the local economy, about a given sector in an emerging market context. The fourth one is the herd mentality, unfortunately, as well. There is lack of leadership, generally speaking, in the financial world when it comes to impact investing and sustainable finance. And it's a very human thing. We all are, culprits of that, I would say. We all either seek to follow a leader, right, and tend to follow the leadership of others in our lives, generally speaking, because we don't want to take the risk, being the first one to take the risk and to be blamed for taking that risk as well. So we need, I think, the larger financial institutions, the largest financial institutions globally, to engage further into sustainable finance and impact investing as well. Maybe the fifth one now is, of course, the regulatory frameworks and legal frameworks in the emerging markets, generally speaking. And the investors are looking for managers to be able to guide them through the maze sometimes of what this can represent in these countries as well. So fortunately, what I would say, right, is that we started with public finance and public institution money. We moved to blended finance and securitization. Now we have plain vanilla funds in microfinance. I mean, I want to remind you that we're in Switzerland, and 60% of the microfinance sector money is managed out of Switzerland by companies such as Symbiotics, Blue Ocean, and Responsability, right? So one would hope that we can replicate the same for the other SDGs, not only for access to finance going forward. The fourth one, and also I'm taking the example of microfinance, we're seeing more and more private investors acquiring bonds, or participating in private placement with microfinance companies in emerging markets, so engaging directly with companies, And this is what the pipeline builder is all about as well, but moving away just from microfinance and tackling other SDGs in given markets as well. So we hope that we're going to be able to progress in that direction. In order to achieve this, we need a change as well in regulation, right? I mean, there's a very welcome change in regulation in the European Union currently with the SFDR guidelines that is pushing funds to indicate the level of attention that they are bringing to impact investing, sustainability, environmental impact, etc. And I think we would welcome the similar regulation or piece of legislation here in Switzerland. We would welcome the same in the United States. And this would very well accompany the initiatives that you have designed in Ghana to welcome investors as well and provide them with incentives as you described originally. So my take on it, right, looking at the constraints that we spoke about, Aggie, is that we're going to be probably working with blended finance product for the forthcoming 10 to 15 years, no? If we want to tackle the SDGs. It's a bit unrealistic to think that we can only rely on investors participating directly in countries, unless again, we have initiatives like the Pipeline Builder that are working in close coordination with governments in each and every of these markets. If we rely only on mainstream finance, to channel funds via sector-specific funds like the ones we design, I think it's going to be a long way before we can achieve the SDGs.
Xavier, thank you for that. Thank you for that rather, at the same time, rich, but also a little bit a cold shower on us in terms of realism. And your 10 to 15 years of blended finance, I think you're right. And if we look back, I mean, just simply taking a completely different sector, if you look at renewable power was subsidized, it was supported by blended finance, it's now become commoditized, but it took it a long time to get there, and governments put a lot of money behind it, they made it very successful. We certainly need, I think, the same thing to be happening here. The challenge is that the courage to break through the herd instinct, and do you do that with information, and lots of information? Do you do it with economic incentive as well? Yesterday I was chatting to someone out here, out there, a young lady working for a large bank, looking at the strategy for sustainable investment at the bank. And so we had a great conversation until she said, and where are you working? And I said, well, I'm working with emerging markets. And her eyes glazed over and she just turned away, and that was the end of the conversation. I'm afraid that's the reality of it. And it's how do you get enough information, how do you get enough curiosity, how do you get people piqued to be able to say, I want to try, I want to experiment. And part of it is the subsidy, part of it is the information, a large part of it is the regulatory environment which enables it and makes it comfortable for people to take that perceived risk and to break out. Against that, I'd like to open this much more now, open the floor really for a broader conversation. Risk and the alignment to the SDGs. How do the SDGs help us to remove some of that risk perception? Is there something that becomes a helpful set of reference points for investors? In the last few years, investors have been completely caught up in the alphabet soup of ESG. The advantage of the SDGs is that they are clear, adopted, recognized. Yofi, what were some thoughts from you about that?
Very interesting question. It's a very interesting question, and for me, that really is the key, alignment, the need for that alignment. But I'd like to give a clear-cut opportunity right in front of us with the UNDP Investor Roadmap Toolkit, which actually does the corporate finance work for any investor up front. So you can actually see real-life transactions that give you the rubrics of the transaction, and even go as far as telling you if you invest in this area, your expected IRR should be 12 to 20% or whatever it is. And that's what the investor likes to see. Clarity, you can actually link the dots and make a clear path towards the investment. But I can give you a good example. In Ghana, we actually have a whole policy orientation that we can outline per SDG. So I'll just give you a few, just to give you how that reality is created. So let's take SDG 1, no poverty. The government's policies are the one district, one factory, which is very granular. It goes right down to the districts, right down to the communities. Planting for food and jobs, that's another policy, an agriculture policy. And then the Nation Builders Corps, in which every year 100,000 school leavers are actually trained and enabled to transition into the business or working world. So they are better qualified to actually add value to the system. And then we have a program called the Infrastructure for Poverty Eradication Program, IPEP, which applies once again on a district level. So every district comes out with its plans on its priorities, and then they are incorporated into this IPEP plan. And then there's another one called the Livelihood Empowerment Against Policy Plan, LEAP, which even goes further down and it goes to the individual level where disadvantaged individuals are taken and trained to enable them earn a living of sorts. Now, if I jump to SDG 2, Zero Hunger, once again, planting for food and jobs, there's rearing for food and jobs, there's planting for export and rural development, PED, and these are actually live policies which are being enacted right now. And every district, every region has its plan to be able to execute these programs. Then there's the greenhouse villages and agricultural mechanization plan. I'll just go up to maybe 3 or 4 of them. SDG 3, good health and well-being. There's a 5-year national health care quality strategy, which every health institution is supposed to abide by. Then there's a national newborn strategy and action plan. Now we are planning for from birth to death. So once you're born, you get your social security number, you get your ID number, and everybody in Ghana is biometrically being registered to ensure that you are in the books. You know, you're not anonymous. And then that will help you actually plan your health care. Then there's Healthy at 2 initiative, which is being executed in the schools, where school children are being assessed and their health needs actually mapped. And then probably the most impactful is something we call the Agenda 111, where government post-COVID realized that the limitations of our health infrastructure were real. So government has gone into this program of building 111 health institutions across the country. And now they're all being done by private sector and PPPs anyway. So that's a very good opportunity for private people. Now there are a lot of women here, so I can't miss this one, SDG 5, gender equality. And in 2020, the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection, together with the ECOWAS Gender Development Center, launched a project dubbed the 50 Million Women Speak Platform, which is 50 MWSP, and it's aimed at helping female entrepreneurs grow their businesses to empower and safeguard economic independence and boost economic growth in the country. There's a stark realization in Ghana that when you lend to women, they pay back. I don't know, maybe with the men there's a little problem, but the women are more reliable and are less risky as a client in this. So this 50 MWSP is a very strong movement to empower women, because in our traditional circles, the women are really the life makers. And so although there's a bit of discrimination, an empowered woman in an African context is extremely powerful. And so that was why this program was done. So, but let me jump down to maybe SDG 16, because each one has a program that is actually being done, not planned. They're actually being executed. Let me see whether there are any that would be interesting, because there's one on responsible consumption and production. So Ghana set up a very active commodity exchange, which is working with the farmers and the buyers in the agri market to ensure that they get good pricing. And we are using technology even in the pricing. There's an IT company called Isoko that provides pricing on a daily basis to informal farmers. And you'll be surprised that these are illiterate farmers, but they know how to read on their phones the pricing so they're not cheated by middlemen, et cetera, et cetera. And it's working very, very strongly. Then, of course, there's the Ghana National Plastic Actions, the Plastic Nations Partnership, Action Partnership. We are still grappling with plastics. And although it creates a lot of jobs, it's also very problematic. So there had to be a national action plan as to how to phase out the use of plastics and go into renewables and sustainables. And then I mentioned the Peace, Justice and Strong Institutions, SDG. There's the National Peace Council, which actually intervenes when there's crisis in any part of the country and tries to bring harmony. Now, the National Peace Council works on many fronts: ethnic, religion, gender, and they're all fused in the council itself. So when the problem arises, there's always the capacity to deal with it. And then there's a National Peace Act, that is enacted by the National Peace Council, which these cases are very clear for everybody. And then there's the National Social Protection Policy Framework, in which government is now funding social protection in partnership with the private sector. And maybe that's the last one, because of time.
I'm going to give the floor also to Agi because she wants to pick up on SDG 5, and Jerry as well is going to be
Let me just give the last one because it's very important.
Your last one, yeah.
Is the partnerships for our SDG goals, and that's where the UN Sustainable Development Partnerships comes into play. And we've actively worked with them on the country financing roadmap, the UN SDG roadmap, which has been very practical in helping investors in there. We participate in the SDG investment fairs and quite a number of other initiatives in partnership with the DFIs.
Very quick, and I'm sure Jerry and Charles want to come in as well. Just to make one point on this, I think what's important in this connection of the SDGs and the investors. I mean, I work for the UN, so I can go on and on about SDGs, but I also think that we need to close the narrative gap. Because if I start talking to investors about SDGs, I think I get the glazed look and walk away. So one of the things that I think we need to play a stronger role, and we need both the input from you as the demand side and you as the investor side, is how do we bridge this gap of narrative? And I would argue that we need to play on the herd mentality that you mentioned on the investors. So we need to get, first set of investors that will bridge that barrier, that understand kind of the opportunities, that we address the risk, because then the risk goes down. As you said, the herd mentality is based on the fact that, the first two go in, then the rest kind of perceive the risk as much lower. So, I would say that to take that and go away or go beyond kind of the national funds, we as international organizations can come in and say, how do we make this information available? How do we kind of, have, let's say, a listing of funds and intermediaries in these countries that are already linked to these SDGs? So instead of explaining the SDGs, we explain the intermediaries to the global investors and then kind of, bring in this herd mentality that you refer to.
Good. Jerry first, Xavier on that, both of you as intermediaries.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the point I wanted to make was to actually just draw the line between the SDGs and some of our portfolio companies, right? And I know, listening to Yofi, some people might have thought that's just a long list of government initiatives, which is just rhetoric. But I can tell you that we have 3 companies in our portfolio in Ghana that have benefited from some of these programs, and that have seen an improved performance as a result of these programs. And I'll just give one example to make it very, very clear. We invested in a poultry processing business in Kumasi, and one of the things that we wanted to do from an impact perspective was to reorient the supply chain towards sourcing from local farmers. So in the first year, we started with 250 acres and maybe 100 farmers. So it was a very small-scale pilot where we said to the company, start sourcing from these farmers by providing them fertilizer, start giving them seeds, and provide some what we call what's the extension services at the corporate level. And we did this on a small scale, and we saw some good results. But the company did not have the capital to scale it up, right? And then Planting for Food and Jobs comes along and literally says, okay, this is exactly what we want to do. You guys are doing, what you're doing is exactly what we've defined. So we're able to scale up from 250 acres to about 1,000 hectares, and now with 4,000 farmers, because that company was able to get on credit from the Ministry of Agriculture, seeds and fertilizer to pass on to those farmers. So Piers was asking, does it make it easier? Is the risk reduced? Are the returns better? That company has seen income go up 20x since we invested. Revenues have gone up 20x since we invested because there happened to be an alignment between SDG goals, government policy, and investor action. So I just thought I should mention that.
That's a great story. We're going to come to you, Xavier, because you had your hand up there as well. But first, let me just, to the audience, Please be ready with questions. I'm going to give the floor to Xavier now, but sitting here patiently listening, I'm going to want Charles to come in, and I think perhaps you may have questions for Charles as well. But Xavier, over to you quickly. Conscious we've got 10 minutes.
Just on the SDGs, but more generally, right? I mean, I think what is key with investors is that you speak a common language with investors, generally speaking. So it starts with financial lingo, no? And there are many, unfortunately, financial intermediaries that are involved in impact investing that do not know how to express themselves, no, with the proper wording and lingo of Wall Street at the end of the day. And whether we like it or not, it's essential, right? They want to hear about net asset value, they want to hear about liquidity, they want to hear about redemption, they want to hear about alpha, they want to hear about, very specific terminology when it comes to private equity, to private debt, etc. And SDG has allowed us to create a lingo with investors as well. So it's essential. And I'm really thankful, and we are all very thankful in the industry that the SDGs, came to light. No, it is simplifying our work, but it is also, unfortunately, there's another side to that coin, and it's SDG washing, right? We've been speaking a lot about greenwashing, about social washing, but now it's SDG washing. I see so many funds out there, right, that are coined SDG funds, no, and they invest in companies where my grandfather was putting his money, right, which are automotive, suppliers, for example, listed in the stock exchange in New York or in Paris. And, I see their names, and next to it, I see 7 SDGs. So we also have to be, careful about the way it's being utilized, right? So we need proper regulation, no? And I think the EU, again, and insist on that, right, is helping out when it comes to limiting, and mitigate life and time will tell. But also we need to make sure, that investors track what is underneath the SDGs, right? It's not enough to speak about facilitating, gender equality. You need to show you facilitate gender equality with an investment as well. You need to track it, you need to be intentional, and you need to track it for the long time. Stop here.
That raises, Xavier, of course, that critical point of measurement of the impact, which is something, unfortunately, we haven't got a huge amount of time to go on to. What I'd like to do now is, I had a hand up there, I think, because of
Yes,
health restrictions.
I would just like to add a couple of things.
Charles, please do.
Before you conclude. Just first on sort of opportunities, something we haven't mentioned in this call. Ghana hosts the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Initiative Secretariat. And again, sort of why Ghana? Clearly there are opportunities there. But I wanted to add some very tangible things that are already happening in case people are still herd following and waiting for someone to start. So beyond the investor maps, which identifies quite a lot of money that UNDP has put together, both at the local level and identifies huge opportunities that people need to work on, that people can work on. A few examples here. With UNOPS, which is the UN Office of Projects, there is a partnership with the Sustainable Housing Solutions, which is looking at creating really breakthrough work in the affordable housing market that is set to start off in January. Over the period between now and 2030, it's expected that project will leverage $5.7 billion into the affordable housing market. We are in the final stages now of developing a particular piece around investment opportunities in the sanitation sector, which is already in the region of 12 to 15 million. Which is looking again, not just to generate demand for private sector blended finance models to address sanitation, but also building an ecosystem with UNCDF, UNICEF involved, UNDP, building an ecosystem of MSMEs who are able to supply into this local marketplace, investment opportunities there also. These are just 2 very tangible examples at 2 ends, one in the billions and one in the millions. And I think just on policy, we look at some of the work that's going on. UN Pulse is working with the Ghana government about data governance and AI. So there's a lot of work going on to create that enabling environment. And with UNDESA, a lot of work around aligning practical policies that Yofi has talked about with the SDGs to create that enabling environment. And Ghana continues to be a host location for a number of things. Next year, we will see the Global Trade Forum come to Ghana. And I think these are opportunities for those looking to tread a slightly different path. It's not untrodden completely. And so the idea that Ghana, kind of nobody's actually invested here, there's significant investment here already. The scope for it is significantly more. And so I think there are lots of opportunities. Of course, there are challenges too, but certainly opportunity. And the UN system here, beyond sort of providing that enabling support to Ghana government institutions, is doing a lot of work. I will list the ECA on cities and the urban context here and the opportunities in urban, UNDP, UNICEF, UNCDF, UNOPS, UNIDO. There are lots of agencies working here very closely with government to create the environment within which sustainable finance can come into Ghana. Let me stop there.
Charles, thanks very much indeed for that. It's encouraging because it's part of this big picture that we've had today on Ghana, which is not just big picture, but also very granular. I'm going to take some questions from the audience. I'm afraid we can't give you a microphone because of sanitary issues, but if you can speak very loudly, please, and then we'll try and pick up your questions. Can you introduce yourself as well? Wonderful points. Thank you very much indeed. Before responding, I'm going to take someone else from the audience. You've got a question there, if you'd like to. Perhaps stand up and declare yourself. We're trying to give you a sanitized mic.
Okay, thank you. I'm loud, but okay. So thank you for this excellent panel so far. My name is Jamila. I'm actually a student of Brindusa Burroughs, and I happen to be doing a project for the Ground Up Project. Met you online, so nice to meet you in person. But I have this question for Yofi, and actually open to anyone who may have a response to it. So in the last days during this summit and this Building Bridges Week, it's come up at least once or twice or even more perhaps that when addressing SDGs, we try not to crowd out other SDGs or negatively impact other SDGs. So in Ghana, we have this transformation, economy transformation, transformation to a value-added economy. So I'm wondering if this definitely addresses probably among other SDGs, SDG 8 and 9, so economic and industrial development. But does this crowd out, for example, SDG 13, so climate action, or is climate action centric to all activity or SDG activity within Ghana. And I ask this because this isn't just a Ghana-centric question. This goes beyond to other countries as well. Thank you.
Jamila, thank you for that. That's a nice, challenging question. I think we'll take both of them. Yofi, are you going to, if we give you back your microphone so that you can reply?
Very interesting question. I think it's a great question. And of course, I mean, there are always antagonistic forces that even drive to the same direction, but they're still antagonistic. And I give you a case in point to even highlight your issue even further. The quest or the desire for Africa to decarbonize and then get into transition energies is a major challenge to the continent's development agenda, because Africa is resource rich. 90% of the world's cobalt resources, 75% of the coltan resources, 50% of the world's gold, 90% of the world's platinum, about 80% of the world's manganese, not to mention copper, 10% of the world's oil supply. But our contribution to climate change effects is less than 4%. And so if I am positing that, well, we need to craft a way that can still facilitate the continent extracting its resources to develop. Now, my president is very clear that we should not be exporting our raw materials and resources. We should be adding value in situ, so that we can achieve some of the objectives that we have through the SDGs. So although we have SDG 8 and 9, and we are looking at increasing commerce, it must be based on a certain objective of wealth creation on the continent, which can be achieved by industrializing. You can't remain poor. You can't have your resources stuck in the ground and yet be expected to develop. Now, what is the solution to that? So you can actually say that, okay, we can quantify and price the resources, right? And create an instrument that actually expresses that value that you can put on the market. That will provide the money for development without having to bring out those resources. But there are opportunities for mitigating against the antagonistic forces of, well, extracting your minerals and then commercializing them. Secondly, with transition energies, Africa will still need to rely on hydrocarbons for maybe the next 20 to 30 years. So being able to achieve net zero might be extended beyond the period that is desirable. There must be a way that we can harmonize that with programs of other countries, of investors as well. Because at the end of the day, the SDGs are not localized, they are global. You can't solve a problem in one corner and say that you leave the problem in another corner. It has to be solved globally. So it's a question that we need to solve globally, not just regionally or on a unitary country basis. But I'll tell you the other part of it. Ghana is about 60% forest land. And we have quite a number of trees in the country that you can actually value and put on the market to raise the needed capital to develop. So there are possible solutions out there. Say maybe Xavier can give us some of the more innovative ways in which you can actually mitigate against the tag between different SDGs. I hope I've given you some relief. I probably wouldn't have answered it fully, but I'll give you some relief.
By all means, Xavier, we're coming up on time, but a couple of quick words.
No, just a quick word of that. I think what matters now and what Yofi mentioned about relying on fossil fuel is extremely important and relevant for Africa, right? The issue we are facing sometimes when we raise these funds, and I can speak about that because I'm actually launching a fund on clean cooking in coming weeks. So we know that Africa now has 1 billion people that are basically cooking on dirty fuels. When we say dirty fuels, it's wood and charcoal, right? Part of the program, in our design, we have embedded LPG. When fundraising, we faced, feedback from some development finance institutions that LPG was unacceptable because it was a fossil fuel. And this is coming from some, European DFIs, when we know that in countries like Spain or Italy, for example, you still go at the gasoline shop, to buy your bottle of LPG and your cylinder to cook at home. So we are expecting sometimes, right, in development, leapfrogging that is actually not going to happen, right, immediately. We need to transition as well. We need this, we need to align with the local realities when it comes to achieving the SDGs as well. Sorry, I'll stop here.
Thanks very much indeed, Xavier. We're on time, we're beyond time, in fact, and getting evil glances from the people outside waiting to come in here. Let me just come now to conclude. I'm going to ask Nadia to say a few words to wrap up, but just before I do that, I want to ask my panelists to say what it is they want to achieve before Building Bridges 2022, the single most important priority for them to achieve and bring back here to celebrate in a year's time. Let me start perhaps with the fund managers. It may be an easy question. Jerry.
I would like to raise and launch an SDG-oriented fund, fully capitalized and hopefully making investments by the time of the next Building Bridges. That really counts on the LPs giving me money to make it happen. Thank you.
I was going to say the same. It's very difficult in our space to look at 12 months. We have to look at 48 months. Generally speaking, because it takes so much time to raise a fund, unfortunately, and that's some things we could discuss as well, and what we can do about this. But in concrete numbers, $70 million that raised to allocate to clean cooking only for sub-Saharan Africa. This is one of our target for 2022. Deploy a good portion of that, and raise an additional $200 million in microfinance globally, so not only Africa specific, but LATAM, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia as well.
Thank you, Xavier. Agui, what would be your...
I will start with 2025, that we really want to promote $1 trillion to be basically public and private finance to be channeling towards the SDGs. And I go to your 1 year, which is that as UNDP, we would like to set up another 15 investor maps globally, and create a platform where we can go beyond the investor maps and be a conduit in these countries between actual investments and investors in the global financial market.
Thank you, Agui. Charles, have you got sound back?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
I mean, definitely continuing to sort of advance the space. And I mean, a sort of increasing ecosystem of actual real finance. And we're also working with the Africa Angel Investors Network that is really able to see strong examples up and down that investment line that people can invest in, and that really the sort of herd mentality shifts in the opposite direction, and that Ghana is very much a part of that. And I did want to say there is very much a sort of a balance and no crowding out intentionally happening. We have people working on blended finance to support national health access. I've given the sanitation fund example. We're working on an innovative project with I Am the Code, which aims to train 30,000 Ghanaian women coders to enter into the IT sector. So really making sure that all those enablers are sitting in place, and that the funds are managed, not by the UN, but because of some of the work that we've done.
Thank you
Definitely by the end of 22.
Thank you, Charles. And it would be very nice to see how many of those 30,000 are achieved in the year. That would be a great metric. Yofi.
What I would like to see is that we clearly demonstrate that this is a real lifetime opportunity, and there's a pipeline of transactions waiting to happen. Instructively, you mentioned about clean cooking. One of the identified areas under the UNDP roadmap is cooking. I mean, using alternative fuels for clean cooking for the women in Ghana. This is a real transaction. So I want to show that the next time we sit down, there is a nice tall pipeline of transactions which you can choose and pick, but we can convince you that you will make money. So bring your money so that together we make money and save the world. That's the message.
Thank you very much, Yofi. And before I hand over to Nadia, our pipeline builder target is that we have got half of those investments that are shown on that flyer funded by a year from now. So that is a very specific target for us. Help us to achieve it, please. And now, Nadia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Piers, and thank you very much to all of you for this incredibly insightful panel. Thank you also, Charles, for joining us today, and thank you for all of you in the room, as well as all the people who've joined online. You know, as when we incubated the SDG Lab together with the Ground Up, the pipeline builder, and decided to front load on this pilot together with Ghana, we were really dreaming of this setup, so to speak, to build bridges between all the different constituencies that you're representing today. And so I'm very thrilled to see that through this partnership, through this collaboration, we've been able to connect the dots. But I think we all realize that that's not enough, right? Connecting the dots and having, as great as this panel was today, we all know that that's not what's going to drive capital to where it really matters, to the SDGs. And I guess my last point would be a little bit of a provocative one, is to ask all of us that are around this table and on this panel that strongly believe in the pipeline builder, that strongly believe in the possibility of demonstrating the proof of concept with the pilot in Ghana. My question to all of us, including to the SDG Lab, is who's missing at the table? Okay, how do we include that person with that glary, or whatever you called it, that glary look at you that was extremely cynical maybe about this kind of initiative? We need those voices, and I think that's the last bridge that we need to build in the spirit of building bridges, is make sure that next year we also have those cynical voices at the table. And so we can't wait 1 year for that to happen, and the pledge I'm making today, together with my colleagues also of Ground Up, is that the pipeline builder is two things. It's one, front-loading on demonstrating the proof of concept together with all our partners in Ghana and hopefully also in other countries with the help of all of you. But it's also ensuring that throughout the year we continue to have these hard conversations so that we understand the glary look, right? So that you understand what is driving maybe that cynicism or that lack of incentive to engage also stakeholders that are not the ones that are nodding today, but the ones actually that don't believe in this. I want to hear all the reasons why they think that this is going to fail. This is extremely important to hear so that together we can address those gaps. So that's the challenge I'm taking up as the leader of the SDG Lab together with all our partners here, is that let's make sure that throughout the year we work on very concrete, building this critical mass with Ghana and others, and make sure that we bring those cynical voices to the table, because they're not to be overheard. There's a reason why they're cynical. It's based on expertise, it's based on experience, and we want to hear those voices. So let's continue to build those bridges throughout the year, and I very much look forward to leading that together with all of you. Thank you, Piers.
Thank you very much indeed, Nadia. And that call to action out to all of you to speak to the neighbor, your next door neighbor or the person you know, to bring them into this room. And now let me please ask you to join me in thanking the panelists, Charles in Ghana, Yofi, Xavier, Agi, and Jerry, and of course Nadia. Please join me in thanking them for a great discussion, a great breakfast conversation.